Okay, so we're getting started. It's been a couple weeks since I've recorded. I've been doing a lot of putting things together related to this dynamic structure. So the title for the YouTube is, now I need to change that because that's okay. So anyway, um, what we've got here is an invitation to consider the dynamic structure. So if you want to understand yourself, to be understood, and to understand your partner better, this structure can really make a difference for you and your relationships, relationship to yourself, relationship to others. I invite you to learn about it and try it out. While it's a simple structure, it's not really a formula. It's much more complex. I mean, this is kind of a simple, it's a simple kind of structure, but I mean, there's a lot behind it. So that's the cool piece to it. And I'll explain more of the details in other videos that kind of go into those kinds of pieces. So let's see. I'll explain more about those details in other videos, and this one can help us get started. So join me to learn more about these. So stay with me. I am messing with my monitor because I still have some noise showing up because there's a delay. And I thought I had turned off the sound, but I had just turned it down a little bit. So hopefully, there we go. So anyway, so the basic structure, it can make us really conscious and aware of what's going on inside. So the basic structure I use, and there's flexibility to this, but just to get us started. So when I think about, remember, saw, experienced something, I feel something because of the reason. So a need that's met or not met, desire, a want, longing that's met or not met. So when I think about, so that first part is the when I think about is really an event. We notice, and all that is we notice something. There's a lot happening all the time, right? So then at any moment, what are we aware of? And sometimes we might think about, oh, something that my partner said to me or did, or it might have just happened, right? Or it might be in the past, or it might be a conversation that you'd like to have with them. So you're kind of projecting into the future. That's what an event is. That's got to do with the when. There's other words we can use, but that's a helpful one to get us started. So when I think about, remember, when I saw this, when I experienced this, this piece, like the person said this. So when you said this is what what we're thinking about. So say the person said something to us that hurt my feelings, and I don't even like that kind of phrasing, but that I felt hurt. So I try to, there's an assumption that that's my feeling. They just set that up, right? The situation set that up, the thing that they said, and then I responded with hurt. So when I heard you say this, I felt hurt possibly. So then it moves into the feelings, and feelings can be emotional, physical, kind of aspects. So sometimes, when I thought about talking to my wife, I started, I felt tension in my stomach. if it was something that was going to be maybe difficult to talk about, right? So I feel, or I feel tense in my stomach, or I have butterflies in my stomach, or something like that. So everybody's a little, I mean, can be vastly different, but usually they're pretty, when there's some patterns here, but we might use different words, and whatever those words are, that's okay. That's why it's dynamic, is because it's individualized. So the feelings, and then there's an action. Sometimes there's an urge, a desire to actually do something, right? So if I felt tension in my stomach, it could be anxiety, for example, or a difficult topic to bring up. I felt anxious and I wanted to avoid it, right? So I feel anxious might be a nice summary for that, and then what that would do. So it's got a couple of components, just like the event does. And when I go into more details on each piece and then each feeling, and I'm going to just hit the main ones to give you an idea, right? So when this happens, I feel this, or I felt this, and I might have wanted to act. And that's the idea, that feelings will tend to give us some sort of action that we want to take. It'll just, it's part of that whole process. So it's not just piecemeal. So we can kind of combine it together. So there's primary emotions and tertiary, or secondary and tertiary kind of levels that we have going on. But what I mean by that is primary is this really subcortical that Jacques Panksepp talks about. Tertiary is kind of like some other feelings that we've had to learn about, grow. But the ones that are subcortical are often there very early in our life, and they continue to be there. So, and they show up that way. But you'll understand a little bit more hopefully today. But I'll just give you a smattering of the basic kinds of feelings, because you go, well, what do I feel? Sometimes we don't even have a language around that, other than I'm angry, I'm happy, I'm sad, I'm nervous, stuff like, kind of superficial. But there's more than those, and I'll kind of hit on those. And then I'm planning on hitting these different feelings like just a class all by themselves, because they're so powerful. And feelings tend to be kind of pushed to the side. Descartes sometimes gets blamed for that. I'm not sure, I've heard that discussion, but not everyone, that's just kind of the interpretation of some ideas of how he separated things out. But anyway, and then even psychology, behavioralism, if you've ever heard of Skinner, that also tends to downplay the emotions. Not all behavioral oriented, like therapists or people creating theories or approaches, would see it that way. But anyway, because some take those into consideration as part of the whole piece. But there's a lot of tradition, a lot of hierarchical, masculine kind of locations. Not that men can't talk about feelings, but very traditional kinds of approaches can be, just give me the facts, give me the information, nothing about feelings, whereas feelings are very powerful. It's very, I see that in clients that I've had, in couples. Those feelings, we just don't always know what to do with them. But they're so very important. They drive us, they guide us, they tell us what's going on. So that's why I bring that up. So the big one that we talk about, and often we wouldn't maybe think of this as an emotion. However, seeking a kind of a circuit. Jacques Panksepp was a person, he passed away a few years ago, about 6 years ago, I believe. But he spent his whole life studying emotion, and at very deep levels. And he describes how he wanted to help, humans. And he works with a lot with animals, but also the model seems to be very applicable just because we're beings, right? So yeah, there's gaps. We're not identical, of course, to the way animals might feel some of these feelings. But he actually found that, like animals actually can laugh. There's a laughter or when, so it's different than what it would sound like in humans, except for little babies like chortling. So it's got that kind of very primary, early kind of emotional kind of behavior. See the action that comes with that feeling. So anyway, maybe a little, hopefully. So anyway, seeking. So there's a seeking circuit. So we're always, lots of our life are seeking. We often would think of that as seeking, like when we're hungry, we're going to go seek food. If we want, if we're thirsty, we're going to go find something to drink. So that seeking circuit could be used there, but it's actually much more broad than that. So how do I want to be? How do I get the resources to survive and thrive is really the idea behind that. So it's very broad and it overlaps with some of these other emotional primary circuits, primary emotional circuits. So, so when I'm seeking, this, like I'm seeking care or seeking to give care to like a child, care is one of the circuits like love and connection. That is going to be, I'm seeking to do that, or I'm seeking to receive support, for example, right? So they can overlap some, but seeking is a kind of a big, big circuit. We're always looking to get these needs met, these resources to guide us, to take care of ourselves. So one of the ones that happens if my seeking, so this is another circuit, but it will show up when we have a seeking circuit and say we're getting blocked, like say you're stuck in traffic and you were hungry, sometimes we get upset, right? And so we might get more edgy. And then if someone does something that makes it even more problematic, like they cut us off or they block, an exit that we want to get off and go a different direction. So the anger circuit might show up and we might feel angry because we got blocked. That's information. So that's why this I feel. Anger can be very tricky in relationships because of there's often aggression that's attached to it. So if we have aggression attached to it, that's going to be a problem. Or if I attack someone verbally, right? If I call them names or insult them, that also creates part of the problem around anger. But we don't have to act angry. We can feel it, but we don't always have to act on it. So we'll talk about that more down the road when I focus on that particular emotional circuit. But we also might have anxiety or a fear circuit. So the anger could be the fight or flight kind of piece that shows up in our sympathetic nervous system. So we have anxiety, right? If we can't, like we're worried we're not going to, I think I used it an example of I want to talk to my partner and I'm feeling anxious or I have butterflies in my stomach, right? Because I want something, see the seeking, I want something from my partner maybe, or I want to talk about it and I'm, afraid of maybe the response or they're, not sure, or the history of not feeling heard, for example. So, so that's another one, that anxiety. But anxiety is telling us in the flight kind of piece of it, is it's telling us that we need to move away from something to keep ourselves safe, right? Move away from a person or a situation or what, and or run. Sometimes it becomes very big. And so sometimes what happens is that we want to talk to our partner, or we want to communicate, or if they're talking to us and they're upset, sometimes we avoid, right? We'll just shut down or we'll leave. And that's okay if our anger is really up. I'm getting it a little ahead. We'll talk more deeply about that. But if you can get an idea, like that is really important. That anxiety is telling us something, and then we might react to the other person. For example, if we're wanting to talk and they're upset with us, or they don't feel like they're hearing us. But there's ways of being heard. But you can see how complex these are. But it helps to go, what's going on with me? And there's levels of intensity typically with these emotions. And so when I talk about each of those circuits, I'll go more into detail about, kind of the variety of ways of saying I'm anxious, because we could be feeling terror, which is a lot of anxiety, or we could be just feeling, hesitant, or a little apprehensive. Those are very different, right? Just like the anger circuit, we might be feeling irritated, or we might feel peeved, or we might feel pissed off, or we might feel enraged, right? So, and there's more variety there. And the more intense tends to be associated with, some actions. So that's once again why it's helpful to be aware of that feeling and then what to do with it. How can we get heard? How can we get what we're seeking? So another area is a panic grief circuit, emotional circuit. So sometimes panic could be when, there's a real threat out there in a situation, and we can't get away from it. We may just panic. We can also dissociate, so like just check out. But there's another way that we do it, and it's related to grief, sadness, depression, around support. So the very same example, I guess I've created a theme. I hadn't planned on that. But if we wanted to talk to a partner, our girlfriend, our wife, our husband, boyfriend, or anyone, there could be, and then they weren't really wanting to hear us. We might feel unsupported, unheard, and then we might feel some panic. And we often think we're just anxious. And why are we anxious? It's because we're looking for support. And when we don't get it, when we're seeking that, right? And we want to be supported, and we'll go into ways in which, that could look for people. And that's really the third part of this dynamic structure, which is more about the reasons, the wants, the needs, the longings, desires, values. But let's just stay with this feeling piece, the second kind of component, key component. And so then we have this panic grief. So we can feel that. And then panic is going to be fairly intense. Grief, of course, could be relatively low, sad, blue. And it depends on the individual. It can be differences between, what the intensity means to you versus what it means to me. So that's where the understanding and trying to understand the other person's point of view and hearing those kinds of feeling words. But it really helps if we understand it ourselves. So then we go, okay, so the grief, if I'm really despondent or in despair, I feel all alone and abandoned, that might be higher, more intense levels of that. So another area, emotional circuit, is care, that love and connection circuit. So we could be seeking that out. We seek, before we're paired up with someone, if we're in a paired up relationship. Some people have open relationships, so there may be a more broad definition, but if there's one main person or several even, we're looking for love and connection. Depends on, what we mean by that, but we're looking to provide nurturance, or to receive it. And so if we didn't get it, that's where that panic grief could kick in, because I really wanted that person to hear me. Here's a little tidbit or taste of what's to come. We can use this structure to be heard more. Once we kind of own our feelings, that's not always easy, but it really can help us get some of those needs met, including and especially around love and connection. So the idea there is that we're made and to care for others, and that's a part of our biology. So then there's a sexual desire or a lust, is how Panksepp uses the term lust. But anyway, there's a sexual desire, right? There's a desire to get those physical needs met, and we could be seeking to get it met. But what if our partner isn't interested at that time, or we've been behaving in ways that doesn't nurture it? There's not an emotional connection. Some people like to have an emotional connection, for example, or the way that they're touched. May or may not like the way that they're being touched. As we might seek that out. So we don't know, I didn't always think of it as an emotional, but this very primary circuit of emotions that drives our lives, right? Not everybody is interested in sex, but many of us, some people are asexual, right? They're not as interested in sex possibly, which is okay. It doesn't mean there's anything. Yeah, I'm not saying that's wrong. I'm just saying for a lot of us, that is a huge thing. And I often have worked with couples, and that's a big thing that's come up. Affection, warmth, physical touch, caressing, and more physical intimacy. So that can show up. And there's different levels there, right? Of what we might want. Public affection. Some people don't like it and some people do. And how much touch would I like? Holding hands, putting arms around each other, hugging, kissing, and what kind of kissing? In public, right? Or in private. But if you get the idea there. And then a play circuit, one that just doesn't always show up, that fun part, right? You go, I'm having fun and I'm seeking to have fun. This circuit, could be part of that, being playful. It might be verbal. When we're little, we often do roughhousing, but, some of us are very physically, we want to go outside, or could be inside, could be in a gym, and we want to do something and we want to play. Sometimes that will be very serious kind of play, but for some of us, the play, and we can get more into it when we discuss that emotion circuit, at least I'm planning to, right? And so then, well, how do we play? How do we go about engaging in play? And so, yeah, we'll break that down some. Now for tertiary. I'm using tertiary because Panksepp uses that, because it's more up in the cortex, right? Up in here, prefrontal cortex, our thinking brain. Those subcortical parts, are getting information, but they're not the same kind of like thinking that we might have. Of course, we can temper and adjust them with our thoughts and intentions, but these take like time to develop. They're not maybe there early on. And two of them first two are disgust and contempt, which are slightly different. They're more learned, right? We learn like that thing doesn't taste good, or this situation is not something I want to be around. Or contempt. Contempt has an element of disgust, but it also could be about respect. Like I've lost respect and I have contempt for that person. But that takes a lot of thinking, thinking and having interactions, or having some thoughts about what that, that group or that political party, right? Sometimes we might react in contempt about that. That gets really complicated. Another area is shame, guilt, embarrassment. Embarrassment is kind of on the low level. Shame and guilt when we talk about them, but we have to kind of interpret, right? When we have shame, typically we're aware, being self-conscious of, letting others down, for example. But shame can have an element in which I've come to the conclusion that there's something wrong with me. Not always when shame shows up, but we could be shamed by other people and then we take that on. It may be beyond guilt that, gosh, I did something that violates my values and I feel guilty. Shame can have the idea, the flavor, I not only did that thing, but I did it because I'm a bad person. So I carry that around. Embarrassment, of course, is a very light, much lighter, typically. I mean, we could feel mortified in the embarrassment. However, it's a little different compared to shame and guilt. I guess once I said mortified, that one may be a high end of embarrassment, form of embarrassment, right? You feel mortified in front of a group of people. And it will overlap. These can overlap, like with support. Then we, people don't pay attention to us, or if we're talking and then they're ignoring us, that could show up, right? Embarrassment, like I was saying something and they didn't hear me, or didn't want to hear me, or they got distracted by something else and didn't seem to care. Now it's engaging a couple circuits, but you kind of get the idea. And then surprise. Surprise is kind of, it takes some thinking. We have to be, like babies can be startled. Startle's a slightly different. I'm getting a little technical here, just because this is an area that I've really enjoyed studying. But yeah, babies can be startled, and then they have the Moro reflex, M-O-R-O reflex. They tend to throw their arms back, and they go like that. Versus surprise tends to be a little different kind of look on our face. And that's another way that it shows up in our body, it can show up on our face. Sometimes just very briefly, right? And surprise is a rather quick moment, because after a few seconds or moments, we may not be surprised anymore. So there's levels of intensity, there's elements to all these feelings, but you kind of have an idea, right? When I saw the park, I felt, or I feel like running around and going down the slide or going on the swings. Would you like to join me? Maybe an invitation. And why do I want to do that? So you get the idea. It can be for those kind of playful reasons, those joyful kinds of, things that we think will create joy for us. So then the third piece. So we've got the when this happens, I feel, and then the because. And the because has to do with wants, longings, desires, values, needs. I often refer to them as needs, but it's a little tricky. Want sounds like, gosh, I just want, like want, and it could feel like that, or need. Sometimes people go, well, it feels insatiable. Like there's never, all my needs are met. Well, probably not all our needs, but many of them can be met. People who study that, they go, they actually can. They're not that many, and they're usually very similar across, for all of us, right? They're not that different. And I have people, tends to be the guys, and I think guys have been taught not to pay attention to those. And women, I know, sometimes just give up a lot of needs, to serve other people or to accommodate them. So it's a slightly different way, but they tend to still, I've noticed, not all, I'm just generalizing, women will be in touch with those. And it can be very frustrating because they are. It can sound, like to the guy, if there's a lot of requests about trying to meet those needs, oh, there's just too many. Probably not. It's just that they've probably gone unmet for quite a while. So hang on just a sec. So what we want to do, sorry, I got a little distracted there. Around the needs, right? I was talking about the difference between guys, because I'll hear it. I don't have many needs. We probably do. We just don't always pay attention to them. And they'll show up, right? But we won't even be aware. And that's part of the reason this dynamic structure can be helpful. We know what we're wanting. Often when I work with, couples, male, female couples, I find that, I say, well, what do you want in a relationship? And often, but not always, I mean, that's not a requirement, but women will often have an idea of how they want that relationship to be. And for some of us guys, we don't really know what it is that we want. And it's really important because that's when we run into conflicts, there could be like differences of what we want. So how can we express it? But we'll go down that road soon enough. But for right now, what do we want? What are we seeking? That seeking system. What is our intention? What do we intend? And it does play into what's going on. So this is about our relationships, our quality of life. I've mentioned that, they're not insatiable or excessive. When they're met, the problem is that guy named Marshall Rosenberg, I think, put it. I just was listening to him again, reviewing some of his ideas, and it's related to the dynamic structure. He has kind of a similar structure, and a lot of the ideas overlap, and I've gotten some of those ideas from him. But we tend to just be nice, and he would say dead people inside because we're not taking care of those needs, and now they've grown bigger, right? We're not even aware of those. So what are those categories, right? And there's similarities across cultures, across history, across people, but one of them is subsistence and protection, right? So having food and shelter and clothing and water are very basic needs, right? And it can be bigger than just us as individuals. Could be for our country or our area. People are worried about contaminated water, for example, or the contaminated air, or the ground, that have, like when there have been train accidents. So those needs will start to pop up and people go, I've got some health concerns, or they're having trouble with all the fires. There's fires in Canada. I think Nova Scotia is one of the places that was coming into New York City, and it was orange in New York City, and they were discouraged from being out. And people were like couriers and people who were delivering things, and they were encouraging them to wear the 95 masks, right? Because there is so much in the air, the particulates, and there were more people going into the emergency room. So very basic needs, right? And then how that, we can get into, that gets really big. How does that happen? How did these fires start? Apparently lightning is what I've heard created these. And then, but it was also very warm in Canada. So you can go down that road, but let's just stay with the basic idea of needs individually for now. Another area is love, caring, affection, warmth. There's also the feeling, right, of care, but there's also that need. to feel cared for. And there's numerous ways that we might want to sense that. And then another kind of similar area is empathy, compassion, understanding. I want to be understood. I want my partner to understand me, care about me, have compassion towards me, or compassion towards other people. I want to be understood. I want to be seen. I want to be heard. Can be part of that, right? Belonging. Belonging could be to a family unit, could be to organizations. There's an element that some companies, people will feel like they belong, right? But we often think of, a person belong to religious groups or other kinds of groups where they belong. So churches, synagogues, mosques, people may belong to those kinds, belong there. I feel a sense of belonging. It meets some of my need. But other people belong in other ways, right? They might be artists who share a community or a building, and they feel like they belong there, for example. So that plays into one of the other ones is creativity. Some of us out there are artists and they have a great deal of creativity. A lot of us can have tremendous creativity and may not always be able to express it. So, so that will play into play and fun, right? I want to have fun. I want to enjoy, have ease, be stimulated, that kind of thing, to learn. So another big area besides that one, on my notes, I jumped over it. I don't want to forget it, is freedom, autonomy, authenticity. Do I have to be what my partner wants me to be? That will show up, right? And that's when I say, well, how do you want to be in a relationship? And that doesn't mean we have to act totally differently. Like, we can talk about it, try to figure it out. But sometimes I know that people feel like they give up themselves. By the way, women tend to accommodate a lot. And then some of that is the estrogen, oxytocin, maybe, that, and there's a cultural piece to that they adjust and they're in charge of relationships. And they do a lot of adjusting. I'm amazed at how they are so aware and adjusting, but they may want to be authentic. Who am I? And guys have that. I mean, testosterone seems to be related. Helen Fisher, bioanthropologist, talks about that, is I think where I got that idea. But the idea of testosterone tends to create this kind of individuality. Well, you can see where that's going to create some difference. And a guy may feel like, oh, I'm being bossed around. I don't have autonomy. But this structure, the dynamic structure, can talk about that. It doesn't have to blame, oh, you're trying to control me. You said this and you're trying to control me and I'm angry. That's one way to say it. That probably won't be helpful to say it that way. But sometimes that anger is important, by the way. I want to jump back to anger, because anger can be very misunderstood just because of the way that it shows up around if there's violence or aggression or hostility, that's piece of it. So that can cause harm. But the anger usually means that something really important is going on. So how can we talk and communicate about it? So instead of just shutting down and not talking about it, for example, and I find that happening, and just not going to deal with that when there's a clear request and there's no response. And then the other person is frustrated. For example, could you do this for me? I'd like to, trying to, to use just some general kinds of scenarios of, activities. I'd like you to come to the party with me. And maybe you're exhausted, or you don't want to, or you don't like those folks. Now you've got a conflict, right? And how can we talk through that, of what that one person wants or needs from the partner? They want to be accompanied, or what is it? What's the need and what's the other partner? Like, what's the struggle there? right? For them if they're not wanting to go, and actually having a conversation rather than being forced. So contribution and meaning, learning could be part of that. That's part of fun, can be part of it. We don't often think of that, but really when we're motivated to learn on our own, it's usually pretty fun. At least I enjoy that. I feel very motivated. That's why I liked college, when I got to study things that I really wanted to learn about. I was so happy. It was different kind of learning than I had in, high school. I really liked grade school, but that, it's just different. There's this curriculum, right? So the understanding and clarity, if we can get understanding and clarity before we try solutions and strategies. Often I want you to go to this party. Okay, well, how come? That would be the understanding, for example, right? That may be what you might want to talk to your partner about, and you're not sure they want to go because the last time, or they don't really like some of the people who are there, and so then you might feel anxious about it. Do you see how I'm feeling anxious, and I'd like to talk to you about, this party, and I'm feeling anxious about it. And then trying to understand, because I really want to be heard. Could you hear me? And that's a way to kind of, could you hear me? And then try to hear the other person. Often we move past this, so quickly, and then there's conflict, and then we have arguments and reactions rather than responses. So hopefully this makes sense to you. So the basic structure, this dynamic structure, is when blank, this happened. Could be for yourself. When I remembered that presentation that I gave 2 weeks ago at work, I felt elated, thrilled, joyful, because you put a lot of work, you learned a lot, and you taught, or you presented it right in a way that was, because I had a need to be clear and to be understood and to be effective or to contribute. Could be a variety of things, right? So that would be a pleasant way, and we can look at that. And actually that can help build us up when we aren't just, criticizing ourselves or the other person, because we're often looking at things that are not lined up. And some of us have just what Sarah Payton would call savage inner critics, or DMN, default mode network, kind of this automatic voice that we have. So yeah, it may not be when I thought about it, wasn't perfect. I felt embarrassed that, because I wanted to be perfect. Well, that need is going to be impossible to meet. And that may come from something else, by the way, but you kind of get the idea. So when this happened, or when I think about this future, when I remember this past one, when I sense this, or when I see something, or, that kind of thing, or when I hear someone bickering, like at another table at a restaurant, I feel tense. I feel a body feeling, and this body feelings are usually related to that emotion, right? And then there's some urge to act. And the when part is also really critical to go back there. Can be very helpful. I said critical. I prefer to just say really helpful, when it's not about just saying you did this, when you did this, and like in a blaming tone. But when I heard you say this, I felt this, I felt tense, or I felt satisfied, or whatever it might be, because what was the need, the want, the longing, the intention, the value that you're really wanting. Because usually that is a big area that we can actually come together. What is it that we want to create, right? So that is really, yeah, it's very, very powerful. I mean, it can be misused, of course, and but I encourage you to try that out. When I felt, because, and then just fill in some blanks. and just to notice it or journal it at first. Because you go, oh, it can start to flow. It's not maybe how we usually talk, but it can start to flow that way. And it has some flexibility. You don't have to actually use it, but it helps when you're learning it to be aware. This is how I tend to think when I work with clients. I tend to use this kind of model, and there's lots of reasons from a psychology kind of standpoint, but it's also very effective. And so it just kind of like, it helps me to organize what's going on so I can understand the other person and then, contribute hopefully to the person, to the couple. So member of the relationship. So I encourage you just to consider that and think about it and join some other, plan to do the classes live, but hopefully you can join and you can learn about those feelings. They're just so amazing, very exciting. They seem so like, I don't know, it could just seem, everything can seem so like not amazing, but I go, gosh, sometimes I just yeah, that triggered a thought in me. So when I said that, here's an example. When I said that, I remembered people kind of going, oh, I was talking about some animals I saw on a trail, kind of like, oh, and they kind of said that, kind of like, wow, that's just any day we can see deer in Colorado Springs. Okay, well, that's kind of true, but 5 feet away, not always, or some other animals, or seeing them grow, or baby ones. I go, and I felt sad, and I felt because I wanted to be heard, because I was delighted that I was reporting this because I found it very very important. Um, and I think because there's just so much available and things and activities, and I go, I've just tried, I didn't always feel this way. But I've just grown to like, oh, feel more connected to nature. And I go, gosh, that seems pretty significant. We, but we'll go into that maybe another time. But you kind of get the idea, maybe that I had this experience and I felt like this person, and it happened more than once, but I'm thinking of one particular one, and I kind of said it, and then they're like, oh, yeah, or yeah, that happens all the time. I'm like, well, isn't that neat that it happens all the time, that we can be so close to that animal? So then I felt, because it was just meaningful to me. And is that not enough? Does it, like, yeah. So you kind of get an idea. I didn't go into a big discussion about it. Took me a little while, kind of like, I was like disappointed and then thought about it later. But if that gives you an idea of kind of how I just used the structure right there. And then I go, where is that person coming from? Oh, and then I felt sad because I go, oh, that's my reaction. And I go, to them, seeing, birds and various, four-legged animals, they I go, oh, that's, like they see them all the time. I go, horses, I have horses nearby. And I go, well, that's really cool. Not everybody has horses nearby. But for them, that seemed old hat. And I'm like, gosh, where's their amazement? Maybe like, golly, what do we have to do, to like feel joy? But that's just my take on it, right? And I didn't quite understand where this person was coming from, but I understood enough. I heard what they said. Um, yeah, I was just like, oh, it was very interesting. So sometimes you don't have to address things. But anyway, if that hopefully gives you an idea to this dynamic structure and you go, wow, this can be very, just very exciting and amazing. So hopefully you'll join me again and you'll try this out. You can always reach out. I do coaching around these things. So let me know if you need more detail, more assistance with it. Um, it's simple. It's not always easy, but it's simple, and just getting started is really the main thing. So hope to see you again. Thanks so much. Bye.